The shackled entrance. The great hall of the alien palace was built to make any visitor feel small. Silver arches stretched high into the sky, glowing lines of blue energy pulsed through the walls, and tall guards with armored skin stood in silence. Strange alien banners hung from the ceiling, each carrying symbols that humans could never fully understand. The floor was polished like glass, reflecting the light of the room and the shadows of the many who stood there. Every sound echoed, every whisper carried, and tonight there was a new sound: chains. The heavy doors opened, and a group of alien soldiers marched inside. Between them walked a man. His wrists were bound by metal cuffs, thick and shining, connected to chains that dragged along the floor. Every step he took made the sound of iron scraping against glass. The aliens around him looked with curiosity, some with hatred, some with fear. To them, humans were weak, fragile, and simple creatures. Yet this one did not walk like a broken slave. His back was straight, his head was lifted, and his eyes carried no fear. The guards pulled him forward, their strange armor glowing faintly with energy. They wanted him to bow, but he refused. Even in chains, he did not bend. The hall grew quiet as the crowd noticed his defiance. Some of them whispered in their alien tongue, their voices clicking and hissing. Others stared with wide eyes, confused by his calmness. A human prisoner should tremble, they thought. He should cry out or beg for mercy. Yet he only walked forward, step by step, his chains clinking like a rhythm of defiance. At the far end of the hall, upon a throne of crystal and silver, sat the alien queen. She was tall and graceful, her skin shimmering with a faint metallic glow. Her crown looked like it was carved from starlight itself, sharp and beautiful. Her eyes, however, were colder than any jewel. She ruled with silence, and her silence was more terrifying than any scream. The entire hall seemed to lean toward her, waiting for her reaction. The man was forced to stop in the center of the room. The guards held his chains tight, ready to drag him down if he resisted. But he did not move. He stood still, his gaze fixed on the throne. For a moment, nothing happened. The queen sat without a word, her face unreadable. The aliens around them shifted uneasily, waiting for the usual judgment. Normally, she would speak at once, giving orders for punishment or death. But tonight she did not. She only stared. The prisoner let the silence stretch before him. Then, slowly, he opened his mouth. His voice, low but steady, echoed through the grand chamber. It was not the voice of a man who had given up. It was not the voice of fear. It was the voice of someone who remembered who he was, even in chains. The sound struck the queen like lightning. Her fingers, which rested so still upon her throne, twitched. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in recognition. The hall, filled with so many beings, grew deathly quiet. The guards looked from one to another, unsure of what they had just seen. The man spoke again. His words were simple, his tone calm. Yet every syllable carried weight. The aliens shifted uncomfortably, as if his voice alone carried power. He was only human, they reminded themselves. He was nothing more than flesh and blood. But the queen did not think so. She leaned forward, her body tense. For the first time in many years, she looked unsettled. The audience did not understand. Why was she reacting this way? She never moved for a prisoner, never broke her silence unless to pass sentence. Yet here she was, staring at a human with eyes that no longer looked cold but almost haunted. The prisoner's chains rattled as he lifted his arms slightly, testing the weight that bound him. The guards tightened their grip, but his eyes never left the queen. He did not plead, did not demand. He only spoke once more, and the sound was enough to fill the hall with a sense of unease. The queen rose. Gasps filled the chamber. The aliens looked at one another in shock. She had not stood from her throne for generations, not for kings, not for generals, not for threats or victories. Yet tonight, she rose for a shackled human. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and the hall grew colder with each step she took down from her throne. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to continue holding their prisoner or to kneel themselves. The chains clinked once more, louder now, echoing against the silence. The human lifted his head higher, his face calm. He had achieved what no soldier, no ambassador, no conqueror could. He had made the alien queen stand, and she did not stand in anger. She stood because she knew his voice. For a moment, nothing else mattered. The guards, the chains, the throne, the hall. All eyes were on her and him. Something unspoken passed between them, something that made the very air heavy with tension. The crowd waited for her words, but none came. She only stared at him, as if she was staring at a ghost. The silence stretched, more powerful than any command, and then the prisoner smiled. Even in chains, he smiled. His voice, calm and sure, cut through the silence once more. The queen's hand trembled. The hall grew darker, and the mystery of why she stood for a human remained, heavy and unanswered. The silent recognition. The queen's throne room had never known such silence. The air itself felt heavy, as if the walls and arches leaned forward to hear what would come next. The guards stood frozen, their hands gripping the chains of the human prisoner, yet their eyes flicked nervously between their ruler and the man in shackles. The alien queen did not sit back down. She remained standing, tall and radiant, her crown glimmering in the cold light. For years she had been unshaken, unmoved, untouched by fear or surprise. She had judged kings, silenced rebels, and ordered the fall of entire worlds without a single twitch of emotion. But now, something inside her stirred. The human's voice still lingered in the vast hall. It was not loud, yet it echoed as if the walls themselves carried it further. His chains rattled slightly as he shifted his stance, and once again, his eyes fixed only on her. The queen's lips parted, as if she might speak. But nothing came. Her silence was heavier than steel. It was a silence that carried memory, recognition, and something her court had never seen in her before: hesitation. The crowd of aliens shifted uneasily. They whispered in low voices, clicking tongues and guttural sounds. None could understand why their queen, the ruler of so many systems, the breaker of empires, would show even the smallest sign of weakness in front of a human prisoner. The guards tightened their grip on the chains, ready for her order. They expected her to finally break the silence with a command: execution, punishment, or at least humiliation. But instead, she raised a single hand, palm open. The guards froze. Her signal was clear: do nothing. Gasps spread among the watchers. Never had she spared a human before. Never had she allowed one to stand so tall in her hall, even in chains. The prisoner's eyes flickered with the smallest sign of triumph. Not arrogance, not cruelty, simply the quiet knowledge that his voice had shaken her. He drew in a slow breath, and when he spoke again, his words were steady, carrying into the farthest corners of the room. "You remember me." The queen's hand trembled ever so slightly. The words pierced deeper than any weapon. Her eyes, cold as starlight, softened for a brief moment before hardening once again. But the damage was done. The hall had seen her falter. The crowd of aliens could not understand the human language, but they could feel the weight of his voice. The way the queen reacted told them more than any translation could. Something bound them, something old, something dangerous. The queen stepped forward. Her long robes dragged against the shining floor, their edges glowing faintly with power. Each step echoed like thunder in the quiet chamber. The guards tensed, unsure whether to move with her or retreat. She ignored them. She stopped only a few steps away from the prisoner. The chains rattled as the guards struggled to hold him in place. But he did not flinch. He stood tall, eyes locked with hers, his presence filling the space as if the chains meant nothing. For the first time in years, the queen spoke. Her voice was low, smooth, and carried the weight of authority that had silenced worlds. Yet beneath that weight there was something else: uncertainty. It cannot be. The guards glanced at one another. Many had served her for lifetimes, yet none had ever heard her voice tremble. The prisoner smiled faintly, though his chains cut into his wrists. "And yet," he said, "here I stand." The queen's chest rose and fell with a deep breath. The hall waited for her next words, but instead she turned her gaze away only for a moment. That single motion was enough to shake the court to its core. Their queen, who never looked away, had broken her focus from a chained human. The whispers grew louder now, rolling like a storm across the crowd. Fear mixed with curiosity. Who was this man? Why did his voice carry such weight? And why did their queen, the one who stood above all, hesitate before him? The queen looked back, her eyes burning with questions unspoken. She wanted to deny him, to erase the memory his voice had awakened. But she could not. That voice belonged to a past she had tried to bury, a war she had never truly forgotten. The guards pulled at the chains again, trying to bring him to his knees, but the queen raised her hand once more. The command was silent, yet it carried more power than any shouted order. The guards obeyed instantly, releasing the pressure on the chains. The human lifted his arms slightly, letting the chains rattle like broken bells. His voice came again, softer now, almost like a whisper, but still strong enough to reach her. Even your silence cannot hide the truth. Her eyes narrowed, but not with anger. It was something else, recognition, perhaps even fear. The hall, filled with thousands of beings, felt suddenly empty, as though the entire galaxy had shrunk to the space between the prisoner and the queen. She had risen for him. She had spoken for him. And now she could no longer hide that she knew his voice. The throne behind her seemed smaller now. The chains at his wrists seemed weaker. The entire balance of power had shifted, and everyone in the hall could feel it. The alien queen, unshaken ruler of countless worlds, had faltered before a shackled human, and that was only the beginning. Whispers of the past, the alien court stood in stunned silence. The queen had spoken, her voice unsteady, and the human had answered her as if they were equals. The guards still clutched the chains, but they no longer knew if they were the captors or the prisoners of the moment. The weight in the air pressed against every chest. The queen looked into the man's eyes, and for a brief second, she was not in her throne room. She was not in the present. She was back in the war. The memory came uninvited, sharp as a blade. A battlefield of ash and fire. The screams of soldiers, both human and alien, mixing into one endless roar. The skies burned with the light of ships falling, torn apart by weapons too powerful for fragile worlds to endure. And in the heart of that chaos stood one figure, a human commander with a voice that carried above the noise. A voice that refused to break even when entire armies crumbled. Her eyes flickered, and she was once more in the hall. But the voice was the same. This prisoner, shackled and scarred, was the same man whose commands had shaken her armies long ago. The court could not see the pictures in her mind, but they felt the weight of her silence. And slowly the whispers began. He knows her. She knows him. Who is this human? The words carried from alien to alien, growing like a wave. Some sounded fearful, others curious, and a few even reverent. The guards looked around uneasily, for whispers in the throne room were dangerous. But they could not silence them. The human did not move, though the chains cut into his skin. He let them whisper. He let them wonder. His eyes remained fixed on the queen, calm, almost patient. He knew she remembered. The queen took another step closer, her robes trailing like shadows behind her. Her voice came again, lower this time, almost like she was speaking to herself. You should be dead. The man's lips curved into the faintest smile. Perhaps I was. But voices do not die so easily. Her breath caught for a moment, though she tried to hide it. Around them, the aliens leaned closer, sensing the storm between ruler and prisoner. The queen turned her head, and her gaze swept across her court. For the first time, her people saw something in her eyes they had never seen before. Doubt. She wanted to order silence, to demand obedience, to crush the whispers before they grew stronger. But her tongue refused. The memory of his voice, calling across the battlefield, still rang in her ears. The whispers grew louder now, bold enough to fill the hall. Old soldiers remembered stories from the war, legends of a human who had stood unbroken even as worlds burned. Young ones, who had never seen that war, clung to the rumors like they were hearing a forbidden truth. The human spoke again, his tone steady. You know why I am here. The queen's face tightened. She wanted to deny it, but the words slipped through her guard. No, she whispered. Yes, he replied. You hear it in my voice. You felt it then. You feel it now. Humanity does not kneel. The guards bristled, pulling hard at the chains, but the queen did not stop him. She could not. His words were pulling her deeper into memories she had long tried to bury. The hall shifted uneasily, the whispers now a storm. Some of the aliens hissed in anger. Others seemed shaken, as though the very sight of the man threatened the Empire's balance. The queen finally spoke louder, as if to drown out the voices around her. "You should have stayed hidden. You should never have returned." "And yet," the man said, his eyes never leaving hers, "you knew I would. That is why you stand now." The court froze. The queen's jaw tightened. Her guards lowered their heads, waiting for the order to silence him forever. But again, she gave no order. The memory of that battlefield still burned in her mind. She remembered the moment she had stood face to face with him long ago, her army behind her, his soldiers broken, and yet his voice had made her hesitate. She had not killed him then. She could not. And now he was here, still alive, still unbroken, still shackled yet untouchable. The queen turned slowly, facing her court. Their whispers stopped at once. Her silence was still powerful enough to command them, but only just. They waited for her to strike him down, to remind them all that she was still their ruler. But instead she spoke softly, almost like a confession. "This voice," she said, her eyes drifting back to the man, "it belongs to the one who should never have lived." The hall erupted with noise. Shouts, gasps, and cries of disbelief filled the air. The guards tightened their hold, yet the human only smiled faintly, as if her words were the proof he had waited for. He lifted his head high, his chains rattling like broken thunder. His voice rose once more, calm but cutting through the noise like a blade. "You feared me then," he said. "You fear me now." And though the aliens around him roared with anger, the queen said nothing. Her silence was the loudest truth of all. The breaking of chains. The throne room was no longer steady. What had once been the most controlled space in the Empire now trembled with whispers, fear, and doubt. The alien queen had spoken words she should never have spoken. The human, still bound in chains, had stood like a free man, and the court did not know where to look. At their ruler who faltered, or at the prisoner who stood unbroken. The guards tried to force him down again, yanking on the chains with all their strength. The iron groaned as it stretched, the man's wrists cut and bruised. But he did not kneel. His legs held firm, his eyes never moved away from the queen. For the first time in centuries, the queen raised her hand not to condemn, but to stop her own soldiers. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The guards froze instantly. Her word was law, but even they could hear the strain in her tone. The man let out a slow breath. The sound of it filled the silence like a storm about to break. He lowered his head slightly, not in surrender, but as if studying the chains around his wrists. Then he spoke, each word sharp and deliberate. "These chains are not strong enough." The crowd gasped. Many hissed and shouted in anger, demanding his silence. But the queen's hand did not rise to silence him. She did not command the guards to strike. She only stood, her face pale with memory, her eyes burning with a mix of fury and fear. The man raised his arms as far as the cuffs allowed. The metal clinked loudly, echoing through the hall. "Chains cannot hold a voice," he said. "And my voice is not mine alone." The court erupted again, but this time with unease instead of anger. Some aliens pressed back against the walls as if the humans' words carried weight like a weapon. Others stared, frozen, sensing something shift in the air. The queen clenched her hands at her sides. She remembered that voice rising above war, turning human soldiers into an unbreakable force. She remembered the hesitation it caused in her own armies. Even her generals had whispered of him, a man whose voice made others stand taller, fight harder, fear less. A man who should have died long ago. Now he stood in her hall, speaking the same way, shaking the pillars of her empire with nothing but words. The guards shifted again, uncertain. Their orders were clear, but their loyalty wavered. They had seen their queen rise for him. They had heard her voice tremble. And now they heard the man speak as though he commanded them instead. One of the chains snapped suddenly. The sound like a crack of thunder. The crowd screamed. The guards stumbled back, unsure if it had broken from his strength or if the metal itself had bent under the weight of the moment. The man lifted his free arm, blood running down his wrist, and held it high. His voice rose, steady and unyielding. "You fear me because I am not one. I am all. I am the memory you cannot erase. I am the voice you cannot silence." The queen's breath caught. She wanted to order his death, but the word would not leave her throat. She could feel the fear in her people now. Not fear of him alone, but fear of what he represented. If he stood unbroken, perhaps humanity stood with him. The second chain groaned. The guards tried to hold it down, their alien strength pushing against him. But their movements faltered. Some looked at the queen, waiting for her command. Others looked at the man and saw not a prisoner, but something larger, something dangerous. He pulled once more, and the second chain snapped. The sound rang across the hall like a signal. The human stood fully free now, his wrists still cut and bleeding, but his body no longer bound. He let the broken chains fall to the floor, their echo rolling like drums through the silence. The crowd recoiled, but none dared to move forward. Even the guards stepped back, their weapons shaking in their hands. The queen's heart pounded. She had seen armies crumble, planets burn, rulers fall, but she had never felt her own throne shake as it did now. The man lowered his arms slowly, his voice calm, almost quiet, yet it carried further than any shout. "You can bind my body. You cannot bind my voice, and it is my voice that you fear." The hall was still. Every alien in the room stared at him, and even the queen could not look away. For the first time, the chains of her empire did not feel unbreakable. And though she stood tall, though her crown still shone, the queen knew something terrible. Her silence no longer ruled the hall. His voice did. Humanity's voice. The throne room had turned into a place of fear. The broken chains still lay on the floor, their pieces glinting like sharp fragments of truth. The guards, once unshakable, had stepped back. The crowd pressed against the walls, their whispers dying as the human stood free. He was wounded, blood trailing down his wrists, but he did not waver. His body bore scars, his clothes were torn, yet he looked stronger than any soldier in the room. His eyes locked on the queen, and the silence between them burned hotter than fire. The queen stood stiffly, her crown heavy, her breath slow and uneven. For years, she had ruled with unchallenged power. One command from her had silenced rebellions, crushed leaders, and erased enemies. But now no word came. She had risen from her throne, spoken, faltered, and lost the control that had always been hers. The human took a single step forward. The sound of his foot echoed through the hall like thunder. No guard moved to stop him. Their weapons trembled in their hands, but their eyes refused to meet his. It was not only his body that frightened them, it was his voice, his presence, his unbroken spirit. "Do you feel it?" he asked softly, his words carrying through the hall. "This silence, it belongs not to you anymore. It belongs to me." The queen's lips parted, but again no words came. The weight of his voice pressed against her, heavy and undeniable. "You fear what I remind you of," he continued. "The war you thought was won. The people you thought were broken. But we are not broken. We do not kneel. Even in chains we stand," the hall shivered. The aliens shifted nervously, their eyes darting between their queen and the man. The whispers returned, no longer of confusion, but of something darker. Doubt. The queen finally spoke, her voice thin but sharp. "You are only one man." The prisoner's smile deepened, though it was faint. His eyes gleamed with the fire of something greater than himself. "One man," he said, "is enough, because my voice carries the weight of many. I do not stand alone. I am the voice of my kind. And even if you silence me, another will rise, and another after that. We do not vanish. We endure." The words rolled through the chamber like a storm. The guards lowered their weapons, not by choice, but by something deeper, fear or perhaps respect. The crowd of aliens stared wide-eyed, their faith in their queen flickering like a candle in a storm. The queen's chest rose sharply. Anger burned in her eyes now, not just fear. She wanted to crush him, to prove her strength before her court, to remind them she was still the ruler of empires. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw the battlefield again. She heard his voice among fire and ruin, steady, unbroken, commanding men who should have fled but never did. And she realized the truth. It was never the weapons that had made humans dangerous. It was their voices. It was their refusal to break. The human stepped closer still, until he stood just below her throne. The guards did not dare move. The hall held its breath. The queen's fingers curled against her side. She could order his death now, and it would happen in seconds. Yet her throat closed. The order refused to leave her, because deep inside, she knew it would not matter. Kill him, and his voice would live in memory. Spare him, and it would grow louder. The man tilted his head, his expression calm, almost sorrowful. "You see it now," he said. "Your empire is vast, your throne is high, but your silence cannot rule forever. My voice will outlast your crown." His words struck like lightning, and the hall seemed to shake. The aliens gasped, some recoiled, others stared in awe. The queen's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something worse. Doubt carved into her very soul. The human then lifted his bleeding wrist, showing the scars left by her chains. His voice lowered, steady but heavy with promise. "These wounds are nothing. Chains can cut flesh, but they cannot cut what we are. Humanity does not kneel. Humanity does not break. Humanity speaks." The final word echoed like a hammer against the walls. Speaks. The court trembled. Some fell silent in fear, others looked away, but all of them knew they had witnessed something their empire would never forget. The queen staggered back a single step. For her it was the greatest fall of all. The man stood tall, free and unbowed, his voice now the only crown in the room. And in that moment, every being in the hall understood one truth. Chains could bind a body, but no empire could bind the voice of humanity.